Welcome to Paris on Politics, where we always take you behind the headlines and beyond the spin. Veteran Washington journalists Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson go beyond the spin in their hotly debated new book, Original Sin: President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and the Disastrous Decision to Run Again. I sat down with Tapper and Thompson in Chicago this week for a wide-ranging interview about their shocking revelations and whether or not the press looked the other way. I began by asking Tapper how early Biden started to show signs of slipping.
This was actually shocking when we went back and started researching this book after the election, and we talked to more than 200 people, most of them Democrats and most of them people who absolutely loved Joe Biden, but were very sad to see what happened. Our reporting suggests that the first real signs of decline came in 2015. After the tragic death of his son, Beau. One of his top advisors at the time in the White House when he was vice president said it was like watching somebody pour water onto sand, that was how much there was a decline. And then when Robert Hur, the special counsel, did his report about Biden's mishandling of classified information, they reported that there were signs of him having difficulty answering questions and recalling dates and places and losing his train of thought in 2017 when Biden was working on his memoir. So it definitely goes back. Now, I don't think the extent of it was as bad as we saw the night of the debate until 2023, 2024. That's when there was a real decline. But there were signs of it dating back about 10 years.
And you quote a lot of Chicago folks in your book. You have Congressman Mike Quigley, who was on a junket in Ireland with him and then was shocked by what he saw. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was April 2023, so this is right before Joe Biden decides to run for re-election, or at least announce that he's running for re-election. And Mike Quigley, they're over in Ireland, and he basically just reminded of his late father, who is struggling at the time. He also notices that Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, it seems to be sort of trying to control Joe Biden's energy, saying, hey, you said you were going to rest, you said you were going to rest. You could sort of see the apparatus around the president trying to manage his schedule and manage his energy, all the way back right before he announces his ultimately failed run.
Quigley's story is a really poignant one because his dad had died of Parkinson's, and he is watching Joe Biden behind the scenes, and it reminds him very poignantly of his father's decline, both the way that his father was able to get energy when there would be a family reunion and seem fine, and then the way the air would go out of the balloon. And he games it out about going forward, saying something, and he just concludes that there's nothing he could really say or do that would be listened to or believed.
And as this progresses, the Politburo, as they're called, the folks, his closest advisors, they start managing his appearances, not only public, but cabinet meetings, fundraisers. Tell us what they would do.
Yeah, they were hiding, they were both hiding Joe Biden from the world, but also hiding the world from Joe Biden. And some of this was because they'd been around him so long, this Politburo. And that's not our term, that was a term some senior administration officials would call them, given the amount of power that they had within the White House, not just over decision-making, but over access to Joe Biden. Biden's pollsters couldn't reach him. His cabinet members couldn't reach him. Senior aides in the White House would go months without actually seeing the president. And they, very much closed ranks. And, we have months of private schedules from Joe Biden really beginning in late 2023 throughout 2024. It's clear that his energy is incredibly limited. He'd be going up to the residence often by 5 o'clock, 4:30, having dinner, and people wouldn't see him the rest of the day.
What starts out as innocent enough, wanting Joe Biden to look his best, having note cards, having a teleprompter, becomes not just an aid, but a crutch. To the point that in 2023, Biden will be doing a private fundraiser here in Chicago, and it's only like 40 or 50 people, and the press isn't there. And still, there's a teleprompter for him just to make 10 minutes of remarks. And the hosts of the fundraiser balked initially about, well, we don't need a teleprompter here, but they were told by the advance team for the Biden campaign, you have to have it. He needs it. And that's odd. And Bill Daley is there, and he sees this, and he thinks, what is going on?
Bill Daley, obviously, a name we know here in Chicago. As he announces re-election, Democrats are asking about him. You know, how is he doing in his inner circle of the Politburo, as you call it? He's fine, he's fine, he's fine. Do you get the sense that they really believe that, or that, you know, he had made his announcement, he's running again, and they know what's going on, but they're doing what they have to do?
Depends who you ask. I do think there are some people that still with Joe Biden to this day insist that he not only could have won the election against Donald Trump and would be fit to serve right now, but could very much be fit to serve through January 2029. That being said, even if they weren't acknowledging it, even to themselves, by their very actions, the ways that they were propping him up, the ways that they were shielding him from others, speaks to the fact that they knew intuitively that he was not the same guy he was even in 2020, 2021, or 2022, that he was more significantly limited, and they were using these tools in order to hide it, not just from the American people, but from members of their own administration.
A top aide told me that the very short interview I did with President Biden in October 2022, he would not have been capable of doing just 1 year later in October 2023. So obviously they were aware of his limitations. Now, what they would say is his decision-making was always sound, but the job of president is not just decision-making. The job of president is making decisions and then communicating those decisions to the American people and explaining them. And one top aide said that he was always good on the decisions, but he could never really communicate those decisions to the public, and in fact it got worse as his term went on.
And a key scene in your book, George Clooney flies home from filming a movie overseas to host this fundraiser. Biden, just off an overseas trip, comes up and greets him, and Clooney is also stunned at what he sees. Tell us about that.
I mean, Jake should tell that story.
So Clooney has known Joe Biden since after 9/11. And he met with him privately a number of times when he was vice president, because Clooney was an advocate to end the genocide in Darfur and South Sudan. So they'd known each other for a while. Clooney had thrown major fundraisers for him for years. And he is stunned. Joe Biden walks up to him with an aide behind the scenes at this fundraiser in June 2024, and he doesn't seem to recognize George Clooney, whom he's known for more than 15 years, whom he's had serious, intense conversations with, who's throwing him this incredibly lucrative Democratic fundraiser, $30 million, and who is one of the most recognizable faces in the world. And this isn't George Clooney with his hair dyed to be Edward R. Murrow in Good Night and Good Luck. This isn't George Clooney with some beard for a character. This is the George Clooney we all know, we all would recognize, and Clooney is stunned because the president doesn't seem to know who he is.
And Alex, you know, there's a lot of scrutiny of the press for perhaps failing to adequately cover this decline. You did report on this for Axios. The New York Times was reporting on it. The Wall Street Journal started reporting on it. What's striking is what the Biden team would do to reporters that started to look into this.
Yeah, I mean, they would bully, they would gaslight, they would not tell the truth, they would wave them off saying he's great in meetings. And, you know, I think the reason that I believe, and I've said that I think that press didn't do a good enough job on this, is because now that we've done this reporting after the election, clearly we missed a lot of this story. Now, I will also say it's not like there wasn't a lot of talk about his age. Right? I mean, you know, conservative media was certainly very skeptical of his schedule and would, you know, obviously show him tripping, you know, on a loop. And you also, it was often talked about in a political vulnerability lens, but not as much as an investigative, how is his age affecting his ability to do the job? And there should have been much more investigative work on that, especially since he was asking for 4 more years.
Jake, do you feel that you should have done more? You have that platform. You're reporting every day in Washington. Do you have any reflection about that?
I think that there isn't anybody in the legacy media that shouldn't take a moment and think about whether we covered this to the extent that we should have, that we pushed as much as we should have. And I certainly don't exempt myself from that. I mean, I did ask Joe Biden in September 2020 if he would pledge to be transparent about his health. And in that short interview I did with him in 2022, I noted that the American people thought he was too old to do the job. But there's always more you can do. And knowing what we know now, having been able to talk to more than 200 people and get the real skinny, having been able to talk to cabinet secretaries who told us that by the end of Biden's presidency, they don't think he could be relied upon for that proverbial 2 a.m. phone call in the middle of the night for an emergency national security issue, that he couldn't be relied upon for that is stunning. So yes, the press could have done better. I also think there really isn't an incentive structure in our politics for courage these days. And I wish that, obviously, a lot of these people had been more candid with us before the election than after. But the Biden people very successfully conveyed to the country that any criticism of Biden was only helping Trump. And that, to this day, is a Democratic, capital D, Democratic mindset, where any discussion of what we all went through for this book, that we detail in this book, any discussion of how we got Trump with this gaslighting by Biden is met with a, why aren't you covering Trump? Why aren't you covering Trump? We are covering Trump. I've covered Trump every day. Alex covers Trump all the time. But we also need to look at what just happened to our country, and this decision by Biden to run for re-election and to hide what was happening to him, that's part of how we got where we are.
You know, in the subtitle of the book, you know, you say cover up. I mean, does that imply something more nefarious than just, you know, folks just not telling the truth? I mean, cover up might imply Watergate, where they were covering up a crime. That's not necessarily what it means here.
Yeah, we're not talking about any sort of crime, and you know, something can not be a crime and still be nefarious and dishonest. You know, we have members of the cabinet basically believing by 2024 that if there had been a 2 a.m. phone call crisis, that they weren't sure and didn't have confidence that Joe Biden could handle it. That isn't necessarily, you know, lying to the American people, as Jake often says, isn't a crime, but it doesn't make it just business as usual either. And the reason we call it cover up is because, yes, it was obvious that he was aging. The polls showed that. But the extent of his aging, the extent of the decline, they were hiding that from the American people, which is why the debate was such a shock. Because I think the book very clearly shows that it was not the first time or even close to the first time that Joe Biden had acted that way behind the scenes, and there were increasingly frantic efforts by the White House apparatus to make sure the American people and other Democrats didn't see the extent of it.
It's almost like don't believe your lying eyes. What you see is that you didn't actually see. You alluded to this, Jake. His allies still claim that he could be president. He could carry out the duties to this day.
And that's crazy.
But your book has been a flashpoint. As you know, I'll read the reaction from Naomi Biden. She called it, quote, political fairy smut. What's your reaction to the reaction that you've received?
The Biden family is very close, and that's not surprising that the president's granddaughter would support him, and I don't really have anything more to say about that. I would hope that my granddaughter would support me. But we stand by the reporting in the book, and we think it's an important lesson and important history for the American people to know and understand. And if the Democratic Party wants to understand one of the reasons why so many voters are not listening to them, so many voters don't have confidence in them, I think they should read the book, because it is 4 years, if not more, of complete and utter gaslighting. And the American people, by the way, were hip to this long before the Democratic Party or the news media. The American people were saying for years in polls, this guy is too old and can't do the job. And they kept being told, no, that's not true. That's not true. Well, it is true. And we reported in detail.
All right, Jake Tapper, Alex Thompson, congratulations on the book. Welcome to Chicago. Thank you for
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Fascinating book, a lot of Chicago connections in that story, too. And after this, we go to the opera with colorful young maestro Enrique Mazzola.